called the popcorn beetle. This one was designed specifically for Pyramid Lake based off some other small kind of gurgler. It's like a smaller gurgler and based off some other beetle patterns. But this right here is 3mm foam. You can use any color you like. This one's also a really fun one to play with as well. So this is our size 10 hook. I do wish it was a little bit thicker, but like I said earlier, Pyramid is strictly barbless hooks only. So every time, if I'm making a pyramid fly, just make it a habit of pinching that barb, whether you like to use your pliers or your vise. That way you don't get caught, because they do check quite often, and I've had a couple buddies that even have been cotton swabbed to make sure that their barb isn't sticking out. And like I said, they do a really good job of keeping on it. They keep people honest. They are very forgiving on, first times. They do a lot of warnings and everything like that. But if you're someone who has been caught multiple times, they'll definitely pull your license and they'll blackball you from the lake just for fishing barbs, which is nice, keeping the fishery that way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a strip off this, say about a little over ½ an inch. And this is something that we've experimented with for a long time as far as the thickness of the foam and the positioning of it. So I have a nice little piece right here. If you notice, it's just about twice the size of my hook shank. What I'm going to do here again is just create that nice base, because we're going to lay this whole fly over this whole hook shank. Nice and even there. And this one's, like I said, another fun one too. If you like to use dubbing, you can do dubbing. If any type of chenille you like to use, if you like to make your own dubbing brushes or anything like that. So right here I have a Midnight Cowboy. This one is a really popular color out at Pyramid. And if you notice, again, high contrast with UV in it. So I'm going to cut a strip of my chenille. And there's no specifics on the type of chenille you want to use. It's whatever really is kind of your preference on that. So I can either tie it with just the chenille and the foam, or I can add a tail to it with marabou. And we want to really get some nice wiggle movement out of it. So we're going to be really peculiar on which pieces of the feather we're going to pick out there. And I don't tie really thick ones. I don't really tie thick tails. I want to make sure I get a lot of that excess movement off that back. So I'm going to tie that tail down first. And like I said, these aren't meant to be necessarily as pretty as some of the dry flies that you guys might be tying. I'm just securing this, making a nice even body. So we have a nice loose tail there. So now I'm going to take my 3mm foam. I'm going to pinch this on the back, just about as far out as the point of that hook. And then from there, we're going to wrap that nice and tight. And if you notice, it might look like I'm doing excess wraps, but again, like I said, it's just solely for durability, because this foam will turn into bubble gum after a few fish. So again, putting my chenille at the back again. And this fly doesn't necessarily need as even of a body. So from here, I'm going to take the chenille and create my underbody with this. Clip that off. So now I have a nice midnight cowboy colored underbody. And with this 3mm foam, I'm going to fold it over the top. Pull a little tight there. And notice how I'm kind of building up this red under on this neck part right here. I'm trying to show those exposed gill plates again. So I'm going to pinch it down. And one big thing about this foam here is those first initial wraps on that 3mm foam, we don't want to cinch them down too tight because you'll end up chopping your foam in half. So I'll lay a couple light wraps down and then from there start to cinch it down. And if you notice, we're building again that little bit of a thicker red collar. So from right under there, get a few little secure wraps. We'll do our whip finish. So, the same thing as the booby, the most important part about this fly is going to be this front lip. If it's too small, we're not going to get any movement. If it's too big, it's going to spin around in a circle. So what I like to do, and what I mean by too small is being non-existent, and too big where obviously this looks a little over-exaggerated and silly. But I do want to make sure it does hang over the eye of that hook, so I'm past it. I also want to make sure that I'm nice and straight, because again, if I cut my foam at a slant, if I cut this at a slant, it'll also make that fly spin, and our line will be twisted up as we're stripping in. All right, so if anyone's seen a gurgler, this is a very simple, smaller version of that. And this fly is really fun to fish. What's going to happen is, it's the same thing as a booby. We're fishing this off the bottom with that sinking line. And because of these flies being floating, we actually, like I was saying earlier, we're going to fish them off a tag. And we'll fish our sinking fly below that. So a normal rig would be, we actually fish our flies, I always fish my flies 3 feet or farther apart. Because we do have the fish that are breaking that 3-foot mark. I think the largest fish we had last year was 37.5 inches. We don't want to hook into our big fish of a lifetime, and because we have a 24-inch tag or an 18-inch tag, when that fish is swimming away, we get hooked by that back fly or that front fly, and it pops it out of its mouth, and then you're on a run with a foul hook 20-pound fish that's all pissed off and fired up. So from the start of our leader, I do anywhere from 3 to 4 feet, and you're actually better off being closer to the tip of your shooting head than you are the distance between your flies. So you're better off running 2 feet from your first fly to the start of your shooting head than you are running 2 feet together from your flies. And the reason we run these off a tag is because when these fish come in and that fly is floating, they come in and go, "Goo!" If you're running it off the back and you have a 4-foot long tag coming off like this, all that fish has to do is come up and inhale it, and you're in its throat and its gills and its gullet. And that's the reason that we fish these off a tag. Plus it regulates how high we're coming up, and we're able to feel that grab. Because a lot of the times if you're up here too, because they will grab it if it's just sitting there like power bait too, because it's coming up and it's floating like this, and they're coming by and they'll grab it, and you'll be sitting there talking to your friend between strips, and all of a sudden you're getting hammered. So like I was saying, we're fishing this off a tag. You can run about a 4 to 6 inch tag, and we're doing 3 to 4 feet to a sinking fly that's going to be dragging more on the bottom. This one's running off a tag. And what's going to happen is, same thing where that fly is floating up, every time we strip, because of this lip, that fly is going to wiggle down and then float up. Wiggle down, float up, wiggle down, float up, wiggle down, float up as we're stripping it in. So you can imagine every time you strip it, that fly is wiggling down towards that bottom and then it's floating up really quick. This tail is going to follow all those movements there. And this is a really, really enticing fly for any cutthroat who's feeling very predatory at the time, or maybe even not hungry. You're going to get an aggression strike solely from that fly moving back and forth and floating up and down. Jig fishing is so proficient out there from spin fishermen that we kind of had to adapt our own way of jig fishing that wasn't, you know, throwing big loop oval casts to try to throw jig heads with 20-foot leaders and trying to strip those in. This is our sort of, you know, rendition of jig fishing, and it works great. This fly is, you know, along the side of a woolly bugger, woolly worm, has probably caught more 20-pound fish than most flies on the lake, solely just because of the movement. And realistically, anything that you want to fish behind this here will be very effective too. Since the 60s up until just recently, pretty much the only way that people fished it was sinking line and fishing woolly buggers and woolly worms, just stripping. The old timers that I remember talking to when I first started fishing there, if you want to get big red, you got to be on the bottom. That's all they would talk about. And they think floating flies are cheating, they think indicators are cheating, everything else is cheating except for stripping those flies off that bottom. All right, so anybody questions about the Beetle?
So black's your favorite color for the foam and the tail?
Black and olive are my personal favorites. A really, really good one also is white and chartreuse. Chartreuse is a really, really good color. Black and purple is a great combo. White and chartreuse, black and red. But I really like, if I'm throwing a black fly, I'll throw a white fly behind it and just have those two high contrast flies to where they're going to pick up one or the other. A lot of the times during the beginning of our season, a late season, is when we have a lot of tui chub that are up higher in the water column, especially during a little bit after spring. They've spawned and they have all the hatchlings that are coming out. That's a really good time to fish olive. But other times through the year, the best way, I think personally, is you can have accents of those hot colors like a red or a chartreuse or a purple, but having a white or a black and a white mixture of those high contrast seems to be the most productive for me when fishing a sinking line. No matter what you do, they're going to be a very, very effective way to fish, depending on, you know, obviously what type of species of bait fish and leeches and different types of bugs you have underneath there.